Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Draft. It's Frankie and I. Um, I am
We're
excited to
back.
be back, man. I'm excited to be
We're
back. We're
here.
recording the podcast again after a little, it was 2 week little hiatus. It's a good time to take it. The Broncos aren't playing. There's not much going on. It's not like we're in the midst of free agency or anything like that. But during these 2 weeks, we finally got enough information to come out with another podcast. But Frankie, first,
Things
how
are
you doing,
happening.
man? Things
I'm
are
doing pretty
happening.
well. I'm doing pretty well. I've been enjoying this little break of hiatus. I haven't really been on the socials too much, which has been kind of nice. Broncos news is pretty slow right now, and got to watch from the sidelines and watch as you guys got to enjoy an NBA championship, which has been pretty sweet. How about you tell me a little bit more about that? As the Nuggets are champions, my guy. Let's get it.
Man, it was crazy. The Nuggets are champions. I'm losing my mind over here. I really am. Like, the city is on fire right now, Frankie. I love it. I'm happy for the entire state, the city of Denver. It's fun. I went right after the Nuggets won their chip. I went out that night. City was absurd. People lighting fireworks in the middle of intersections. That was crazy. I went out with my man Zach Seegers, and then today I went to the parade as well. I showed up a little late. You guys have no idea what it took from me to make it on this podcast today. Just know it was a challenge.
Yeah.
It took me hitchhiking. It took me riding one of those taxi bikes extremely way too far. And if you know anything about those taxi bikes, I mean, a 5-minute drive is very, very expensive. I went way further than that. Hey, shout out to that lady that picked me up on that. But anyway,
calves are still burning. She's out there just chugging water, just absolutely exhausted after the ride she had to take you on, I'm sure.
Bro, and I'm a big guy. Like, I felt bad for her. Like, I'm I'm on the back of that thing. I'm like trying to make casual conversation, knowing that her calves are on fire. Like, we're going uphill right now. This is crazy.
She's just begging you to stop. Like, please stop talking to me. You gotta let me go.
Exactly. But city's on fire, man. I love it. Shout out to the Nuggets, man. I was super excited to hear Jokic today. A lot of people were talking about, hey, if I were a Nuggets fan, I would be mad at the lack of excitement Jokic had. Well, to those people, you saw him at the parade today.
Yeah.
He said, I know I said I wasn't excited for the parade. This is the best, pretty much is what he said.
This is the best. This is it right here.
Best. I love it. This is something that'll stick in my mind forever, is what he said, which was awesome. They also said that Bruce Brown is coming back. I'm still putting out that little out of, hey, maybe he doesn't come back, because I think when the money actually goes out there and Bruce Brown starts to realize how much money he can make actually in free agency, might change his mind. But for the time being, super, super excited about that. Nuggets are, don't be shocked if this team is really good next year, Frankie. That's what I will say. And I'm not going to be shocked if your Bucks make it to the finals next year. I think they're bound for it. I really do.
We'll believe. We got a new head coach. I can't lie. There were times during the finals that I'm watching the Heat have to try to match up with like Max Strus on Jamal Murray, and I'm watching Jokic absolutely cook down low, and I'm like, man, there's a universe out there where Giannis doesn't fall on his back, and maybe I'm watching Giannis and Brook try to stop Jokic. Yeah. But for the time being, man, Jokic is just such an unbelievable talent, man. Truly one of, if not the best player on the planet. And I mean, that team is just, there's such camaraderie there. And, you love it. As a fellow small market team, it's cool seeing those just shut up to the haters. We don't care about those LA teams. We don't care about the ESPNs, the Stephen A's. They're saying, these cities aren't good enough for championships or for the coverage. Screw all that. We've got some of the best talent in the absolute world. And it's absolutely awesome to see the celebrations that are being able to take place. And like you said, I mean, It seems like the city is on absolute fire. The celebration seems like it's been going all day long, and it's probably still going out in the streets, and,
nuts.
Good for Denver,
Yep. Hey, and speaking of the Lakers, Malone today, dude, he was on there and he said, or he was on Pat McAfee's show, and they were like, you made a lot about how they weren't talking about your team. They were talking about the Lakers instead. And he said the funniest thing. He was like, just so you guys know, I'm thinking about retiring, because it's exactly what LeBron did right after the Nuggets thing.
Oh my God.
Wind out of our sails. But hey, man, shout out Malone. I have a new respect for him. I like the way he was talking his talk this postseason. I'd have never seen him like that. Usually he's so uptight. This year in the playoffs, he was like, "Yeah, we're winning. I don't know what you're talking about."
Yeah.
And I loved it.
Yeah,
But
no, it was a whole different mentality for that team. It was glorious to see. I can't wait to see them hopefully be back next year playing in the West, luckily, so I don't have to see them too often. But, shout out.
shout out. Anyways, let's move on to the Broncos, man. Enough of the Nuggets talks. I think the people are here for the Broncos. Meanwhile, I know everybody loves the Nuggets, but we have to talk about the Broncos. This is Let's Talk Broncos podcast. Anyways, Frankie, let's get right into it. Let's go into some recent news here. The Broncos cut kicker Brandon McManus. Frankie, what are your thoughts on that? Me personally, I thought it was a pretty good move. Honestly, I did. I'm curious what your opinion was, though.
It's about that time, I like Brandon McManus. I like Brandon McManus for what he did for the 2015 Super Bowl teams and what he was since then. I think he's kind of fallen a little bit off as far as being the long distance kicker that kind of made him his money, I'd say. And I mean, he's always been relatively consistent and accurate from within like 40 yards. But I think when you're talking about paying a guy, I believe he was still one of the top 10 highest paid kickers in the league. I think when you're one of the worst teams and have been consistently one of the worst teams for 5 straight years, there's not really an issue looking to kind of create some money elsewhere in the kicker market. You might see some drop off this year. There might be some times where we're saying, man, we really wish they could have made some kicks, but this is a team that needs to kind of find money to invest in the offense and defense because that's where the problems lie. I don't think any of us are looking at this team this team from the past few years and being like, man, like Brandon I don't know. The kicker's not, I don't think, going to make a big enough difference here that I'm not too upset about it. Getting a couple million more dollars that you can get to have some depth to this team is essential and, only helps them have more darts to throw at the board to find potential players for the future. Because I don't think that this year is going to be the year that they're going that deep. McManus is only getting older and his contract demands aren't the kind that you really want to have for a team that's in a rebuilding or at least retooling phase.
Bro, I'm in the exact same boat as you. I really am. Like, I'm not that worried about it. I haven't really even here's the crazy part. Here's how little I think about special teams and kickers. I haven't looked into Elliott Fry at all.
No.
But here's what I will say, guys. I can look at, and I said this on Let's Talk Broncos the last time. I can look at a spreadsheet of stats and tell who the good kicker is and who isn't. I feel like I don't have to watch them. I can just evaluate it that way. So if you're screwing up on it, there's a serious issue. I trust Sean Payton and the coaching staff to make a good decision with the kicker. I thought our kicker at the time, Brandon McManus, he is a guy that while he was an okay kicker, I thought he got worse from the time he was in his prime, right? I think he got substantially worse. But I just thought that he was too much of a voice, which is kind of weird to say about a kicker. Really weird to say about a kicker. But he's the one remaining Bronco off that team that won the Super Bowl. And not only that, this is like this has to be the most vocal kicker in all of the NFL. Maybe of the last 20 years, Brandon McManus is the most vocal kicker ever. You've never seen a kicker go in a post-game press conference and start calling out head coaches. We've never seen that before. That's insane. But that's the type of kicker Brandon McManus was. I'm thankful he was a Bronco, brought us a Super Bowl, helped bring us a Super Bowl, a lot of stuff like that. But if Sean Payton is trying to establish a new culture, you had to get rid of guys like that. It's just hard to do it when you have these faces in the locker room who expects coaching to be a certain way.
100%.
I think that's what Brandon McManus was.
I think a big part of it too is something that you mentioned, with them having a different coaching staff. We have a lot of experience in the special teams room this year. I think it's completely reasonable to say that this team is kind of saying we don't need to have this super experienced guy that's going to, lead our special teams unit from the kicker position. We can kind of try to find a younger guy that maybe we can tool or develop into more of the guy we want to have for the future that more specifically fits our needs and that won't cost us as much. I think that's kind of one of the benefits when you have more of a veteran established special teams coordinator and staff in general compared to what you had last year when you had Dwayne Stukes kind of trying to figure it out. So I think that's a big part of it as well. When you see guys like you got Katuka, you've got Westenhoff, you've got the whole armada, I think they're going to be able to do a much better job of possibly finding a younger kicker and developing him into something that they can use for the years to come, as opposed to just Brandon McManus, who, is kind of getting up there in age and is only going to consistently cost you as much and seems to only be, as much as it sucks, getting worse.
Yeah. Yep. No, I think you're totally right, man. I just think it was time at the end of
Oh,
the day.
100%. Yeah.
Like, it's just time. Like, at the end of this last season or halfway through the season, I was sitting there thinking, it's probably time to move off this guy. And it's nothing against Brad McManus. It really isn't. I just sometimes it's time to move off a player, and this was time for Brad McManus, so I'm not
Right.
mad at the move at all.
I mean, week 1 last year,
yeah.
he's telling I can't even think of the coach's name anymore. He's telling Hackett to kick a 64-yarder at the end of the game because that's what
Exactly.
he's saying his range is, which, like, that's on Hackett too, but it's kind of like, man, when you're making those statements and you've got the resume to back up that you're allowed to make those calls for this team, it's time to move on, exactly like you're saying. So
I mean, how
completely
many
agree.
kickers have even had as much influence on a head coach as much as Brad McManus is? You know how comfortable you have to be as a kicker, mostly thought of expendable across the NFL, to call out your head coach in a press conference? You have to feel way too comfortable to do that. If you're the starting number 2 corner on a team, you're feeling way too comfortable to do stuff like that. So I don't know. I just think new scenery will help both situations.
Yeah.
But moving on, I want to
He
talk
went to
about
Jacksonville, right? Sorry, not
Yes,
to
he went to
last point. Went to
Jacksonville.
Jacksonville. Good luck to him in Jacksonville. Hopefully that'll be great for him.
Luck for him. Frank Clark, he signed with the Broncos, Frankie. I think we have both been vocal on this podcast about the Broncos needing edge help. Now, it comes at not the best situation because Baron Browning also needed surgery in the process, which seems to be the reason why they added Frank Clark instead of just being like, hey, we need edge depth. Let's sign Frank Clark. But what is your opinion on Frank Clark? And then I want to know your opinion also on, hey, can he be a starting caliber player for this Broncos team?
So Frank Clark, the player, I really enjoy them adding. I believe Frank Clark's played 800 snaps each of the last 5 or 6 seasons. He's put up 50 plus pressures each of the last 7 seasons of his career. This, from a numbers standpoint, is a very consistent player. Has been for the Chiefs, was for the Seahawks for a while. This is a good addition. This is a guy that kind of fits that mold of. I've been saying they need a guy that can play the run a little bit better. That's a little bit bigger. Frank Clark comes in at around 270, 260 plus pounds. That'll do to have a guy that can play opposite Randy Gregory and play ahead of Baron Browning or get to rotate with Baron Browning that can kind of play on those early downs a little bit better. I think it's just a really solid addition. I think the money that they were able to get him for is very good. Again, this is the type of, when you look at the kind of additions they've made recently, I think from a health standpoint, this is kind of one of the smarter ones they've made. As far as the off the field issues, I don't love bringing in a player with a lot of his off the field concerns. I'm not going to comment on them as though I'm, super aware of the player. They're from a long time ago. Either way, don't love it. This was kind of stuff I don't think we were seeing too much with the former regimes that we might be seeing a little bit more allowed now, which is, I'm not gonna pretend I like it, but it is what it is. From a player standpoint, seems like a solid addition. They were able to get him for some pretty decent money. Able to get him from a rival too, which seems like a decent addition when you're talking about a guy who hopefully has a little bit of knowledge on taking down that Chiefs offense. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, you know what, Frankie? Is he a starting caliber player? I would say a low end starting caliber player. But is he the best edge available on the market at the time where you said, hey, I need an edge because of a Baron Browning injury? I think yes. I think it was the best player you probably could have gotten. Edge rushers, really quality edge rushers, aren't sitting out there right now. They aren't. Yeah. Free agency is past. We are past that. We are way past it now. For a position of that high value to be out there, it's just not going to happen. You're not finding your guys that are double-digit sack, 15 sack guys out there at this point. You're just not. So I think with all of that considered, Frank Clark was a good signing. I would have preferred it to be at, hey, this guy is going to help us in addition to Baron Browning, instead of it being Baron's hurt. Let's sign Frank Clark. I just would have preferred it that way. I think it's a better role for him at this stage in his career, although, as you mentioned, very productive. So I'm interested to see how this fit goes. I really am. I think a vet was needed. So that's a good thing. It's just is this the right vet, I guess, is the question at this point.
I'll say this, as it currently stands, it wouldn't shock me. Like, I mean, I'd probably say right now Frank Clark is going to be the leader in pressures in the entire edge room. You know, as much as it
Yeah.
sucks, like I think Randy Gregory is the more talented player. I don't believe that Randy Gregory will be on the field as much as Frank Clark will be this season, just based on player history. You know, sadly, it's very hard to rely on that. Barron could maybe take another jump forward, but again, like Frank Clark's been consistently good. It will be interesting to see, obviously, getting to play for Kansas City underneath Steve Spagnuolo. That's a defense that blitzes a lot. You know, that's a defense that gets to play with a lot of leads. That's a defense that kind of goes after the opposing quarterback quite a bit. It'll be interesting to see playing in Denver, kind of a team that I think won't be able to be playing with as many multi-score leads, forcing teams to throw the ball as much on these early downs. I don't think that he'll necessarily have the same levels of production that he's gotten to have, but I won't be shocked if he's the leading pressure guy on this team and possibly the leading sacker as well. You know, like you
That
talk
wouldn't
about losing
shock
a
me
guy like
either.
Draymond Jones, and then the other guys are a lot of health risks. Like it kind of makes a lot of sense in my mind, but
No, you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right because if Randy gets hurt, I mean, I would say the odds-on favorite, and because Randy's injury history, I would say the odds-on favorite to lead the team in sacks is probably Frank Clark,
right.
which
Well, man,
which is crazy.
I think I put out a thing, I think it was either yesterday, that said like his average over the past 8 years is like 54.75. I'm not sure if Randy even has a single season with that total. Like even
Yeah.
Randy's best year, I'm pretty sure was only like a low 50s number. I can look at it right now. But like, you know, when you talk about a guy who's been consistently able to do it versus a guy who I think could have a boom or bust year, yeah, Randy's never had a season with over 50 pressures. So like I think it's very likely that Denver just kind of signed their most productive player in the pass rush room, and I don't think you can call that a loss. Wish they were maybe being a little bit more like, hey, we don't like, you know, whatever off the field stuff, but you know, it's a long time ago. Hopefully they believe in their coaching staff to kind of, you know, whatever.
No, I agree. I
Yeah.
totally agree. And then the last one I want to hit on, just as far as Broncos news, and then we'll get into the main topic of the show. Javante is looking like he could come back and produce, or that's the word out there,
Yeah.
right? He's practicing. He's out there actually with Pat, like with the football in his hand, and he's actually running around, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's really cool. I would personally be like, I would not expect a ton from him this season still. I just and it's not even like, hey guys, Javante is going to be terrible. It's more I want to be fair to the player. I
Mm-hmm.
want to be fair to the player. If he isn't good this year, I don't want people mad at him for it
Mm-hmm.
because it's hard to come back from this. It's already very impressive he is now. But Frankie, what are your thoughts on this whole situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the way it seems to be on track for right now, based on the reports we've heard, based on what we've seen out of camp, it seems like Javante Williams is on pace for probably I don't want to say the quickest, but like the best knee recovery we've ever seen
Yeah.
in sports, like
I
straight
mean,
up.
that's
Like,
nuts, right?
and that's not me trying to like neg it or be super positive about it. That's point blank. We've never seen a player who's had this serious of a knee injury be able to recover this quickly and possibly be ready to go at the beginning of the season. We just simply haven't seen it, you know?
Mhm.
So kudos to him. Again, it scares the bejesus out of me because, you know, I wouldn't want to be the guinea pig. But I mean, as we're seeing so much, I mean, we just saw J.K. Dobbins today. He's wanting to already restructure a contract and he's holding out. These running backs are recognizing that the league does not want to pay them, you know? I mean, Ezekiel Elliott's still sitting out on the waiver wire, you know? Like there's
Just
so many
saying,
players.
Dalvin Cook is out
These
there.
guys know, and as painful as it is, you know, I mean, J.K. Dobbins is very similar. Javante's probably realizing right now, like, man, I might not get a second contract in the NFL at this point unless I have an incredible bounce back season. Like
No, it's
he's
fact.
going to have to. He has maybe like, and that's just the sad way it goes,
It
you know,
is.
where then he's going to be living on the 1 year contracts. He's going to be kind of having to hope he kind of has one of those James Connors where he goes to another team on like a 1 year, $3.5 million deal and absolutely blows up. And then that team keeps him around for a couple more
Right.
years. Cause that seems like
Right.
the best running backs can hope for these days, which, you know, absolutely sucks for him because he's an incredible talent. And I wish it wasn't that way, you know, but like from a Broncos standpoint, I mean, I don't really know how else they can really play it. You know, you've got a guy who, you know, this is him going into year 3 now. You don't necessarily know if his knee's going to be good to go for this season. So then you're playing on his final year of his rookie year and or his rookie contract, and you're kind of hoping that he can produce. It's just, it's a lot to ask, and it's a lot to then hand a contract to a guy after all that. And, you know, it's just, it's a crappy situation all around. And, I give a lot of props to Devontae for hopefully being able to fight back this early to get the bionic leg on. And, such a big part of it too is the mentality. So I think like if they are hoping to be able to lean on him this year, and if he believes he'll be able to be leaned on, it's not the worst idea to get him comfortable in those cuts, get him out to those no contact days as early as possible, get him comfortable on that knee, get him, as mentally prepared as possible, because as soon as he starts to hesitate, starts to pull up, starts to kind of play a little like, bracing for hits, that's when he's going to get really hurt. And that's when the bad stuff's really going to happen, So that's, I guess, what you want to avoid. So I don't hate that they're starting to get him a little bit of work. But again, as he's currently on pace for probably the fastest and most miraculous knee recovery we've ever seen in NFL history. So hopefully it continues on that route.
Yeah. I mean, and just to double down on that, yeah, it's miraculous that he's even practicing. It's insane. It's wild. Like, I don't think any of us thought this. I think some of us thought, hey, he might become playable at some point during mid-season, right? It was never thought this guy's going to be in all the off-season programs participating.
Yeah.
That's never something that I ever thought. And honestly, you mentioned this as well, but the cold hard truth of the running back position is you need to be completely dominant through your rookie contract, and you might get a good contract after that. That's what it takes. If you have injuries, if you haven't shown that you're one of the top 10 backs in the NFL during that rookie contract, you're probably on a 1 year or 2 year prove it deal. And hopefully you can become dominant in that time to then get a contract. That's just how it works. It is at the running back position. And then after you're off that second deal, you're definitely not getting another big deal.
Right.
You're not. Dalvin Cook, Ezekiel Elliott, as you mentioned, these guys are off their second contract and it's not working out.
Right.
It just is what it is.
Yeah. Such a big part of it too is, we're seeing like these, it's not even half the time up to the running back or how good the running back is. Sometimes it has to do so much with the quarterback contract window that these teams are in, like I was seeing a lot of my favorite like Colts writers are talking about how like, I think the Colts are in a position where they actually should be able to re-sign Jonathan Taylor and give him like a couple 3-year extension, because they do have Anthony Richardson on that cheap deal.
True.
And what a guy like Jonathan Taylor can give you for those first couple years on a rookie quarterback contract is worth it. But, when you talk about a guy like Javonte Williams, this team is probably going to be dealing with the cap of the Russell Wilson contract. This is a team that might be looking to find its next quarterback and be dealing with the Russell Wilson contract. It's really hard to warrant paying a running back in today's market. It sucks for what it is, but that's just kind of the way it goes. So that's such a big part of it as well, that like, it's really not up to these running backs anymore if they're able to get paid to their team, no matter really even how well they get paid.
And I was wondering when the NFL would come around to this, where it's like, hey, unless the guy is truly amazing elite, we're not drafting them in the first round.
Yeah.
Or we're not giving them that big second contract or whatever the case may be. And it feels like the NFL has gotten there.
The pendulum has fully swung, it feels like, too. We're like, it almost feels like a bit much, We're like, I get that Dalvin Cook wasn't necessarily efficient this year. Guys like Zeke necessarily haven't been the most efficient guys, but to see these guys straight up sitting on waivers throughout the entirety of the offseason just feels a little bit mind-boggling, when you talk about like, I think Joe Mixon is a guy for the Bengals.
Rumors,
right? Exactly. We're like, no
weird.
Team's even considering him. Seemingly,
he's lost his explosiveness. But if you're still looking for an efficient runner, a guy that maybe his cap may be.
If I'm a playoff team and we need a goal line back, like that Leonard Fournette role that was filled for the Buccaneers for a couple years. If you could get him to play that, who's just you're like, we're just gonna run a bunch of just straight up near the goal line, get in there. He can fill that role for like $6 million a year. I would totally give him that deal, but he might not want it. He might be kind of trying to be one of those guys that sets a precedent for the backs in the league and says, I'm not going to pay for a third of what the receivers are getting, and I have to play the same amount of snaps.
Yeah.
Probably block more.
Saquon up as well. You have got a bunch of guys, but let's move on to the main topic of the show. We're doing Broncos over under. Frankie wrote down some of the DraftKings over unders of certain players or stats of the Broncos this next season. And then we're going to pick whether we would pick over under on these and then discuss it afterwards. So the first one is Russell Wilson, 24.5 passing touchdowns on this next season. Frankie, would you go over or under 24.5 for Russell Wilson?
Man, that's tough. I think It's a really good line because I really want to put him in that low 20s range. And with the fact that it's
Yeah.
passing touchdowns, I do think I'm probably going to go the under, but it's a very slight under. Like Russell Wilson having 22 passing touchdowns makes a lot of sense. What would you go, over or under?
I don't know. The stat's so hard because you always get a few fluky
Mm-hmm.
type touchdowns a year, especially in that. Like it really could come down to, hey, we're 5 yards out from goal. We're third and goal from 5 yards out. The Broncos have the option to run or pass. They can score on either, and they decide to pass, which gives
Yep.
them, just that 25th that makes them over.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Sean Payton's going to get creative with it. I do think a lot of the Broncos offense will be running the ball, but all it takes is, like I said earlier, Russell Wilson to toss one in from 5
Yeah.
to 10 yards out. It really
No, I
does.
think that's, I was even going to say too, like, I mean, such a big part of it is the red zone offense. Do we see them start to rely on those little gadgety type plays? Maybe the touch passes where Russ is able to get 2 or 3 of just those,
Yeah.
dropping it off to Marvin Mims running around or something like that. No, completely great point.
Right. So it's just, I'm going to go the over on it. If I were a smart better, where it was like, hey, I don't think he'll have 24 legitimate touchdowns and all of them are legitimate, but I think people know what I mean by that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be these big throws 24 times for touchdowns. But I could definitely see Sean Payton sprinkling in some interesting things to get Russell Wilson's touchdown. So I'm going to go over on it. And you picked under?
Yeah. Well, I think a big part of it too, obviously, is Russell Wilson's health. We're going to talk about, I think for a lot of these guys, if they're going to be able to stay healthy to be able to obtain a lot of these stats, I think last year we saw was one of the first years where Russ was missing like a decent small chunk of the season. Well, not first time, but one of the first times in his career we see him actually missing a small chunk of the season. So, I mean, if we see him miss another 4 or 5 games this year, which hopefully won't happen because of his new freshly defined physique, does look pretty fit though. I will say, like there were a lot of people memeing about that. I'm like, okay,
yeah,
whatever.
On the Russell Wilson point, I tweeted this out yesterday, and I want to know your opinion on this while we're still here.
Yeah.
I said pretty much, the question this entire offseason has been, will Russell Wilson play better? I think the obvious answer, Frankie, you tell me if I'm wrong. I think it's very, very obvious that the answer is yes. He will play better.
Oh, yeah.
I think that with improvements across the offensive line, you have a deeper wide receiver room. I don't think no matter how cuts go, I think you will have a deeper wide receiver room. With the addition of Sean Payton and with him leaning down, he will play better. It's just how much better. That should be the question Broncos country should be asking, because if he doesn't perform better than he did last year, it's serious problems. This guy is cooked. Get him off the team immediately. So what's your opinion on that while we're on the topic?
I 100% agree. I mean, you saw last year, I mean, here's the thing. Beginning of the season, like Russell Wilson wasn't great at the beginning of last year, but Russell Wilson up until I believe it was like the Raiders game, like he was okay. He was fine. Like,
yeah,
you truly saw the injuries, the confidence. Like clearly Russell Wilson is, I mean, I think we all kind of understand this. He's such a like heady guy. Like his mental game clearly affects how he plays so much. And clearly with the team, the coaching staff, everything being in such a just whirlwind last year, that clearly affected his play as the season went on, that like, again, I think having the stability of a Sean Payton and this coaching staff, where I don't think at week 8, we're going to have players fighting with each other and the head coach is pretending he doesn't see it on the sideline. I don't see Sean Payton doing that next year. So I think that alone, that like bedrock that the house is going to be built off of for the offense, if you will, the foundation, if you will, that Sean Payton will provide, that alone, I think is going to be so big for Russell Wilson. The communication from coach to, whoever's calling the plays, Sean Payton onto the field. It's going to be so much more clean and concise. Will his play be better? Yes, that's still to be foreseen, but I think that those things alone, just the pure cleaning up of the off the field, like the pure literal, like getting the play from quarterback to field and the practices and all that stuff, I think that alone will just clean up so much of the weird stuff we saw last year. Because again, like when you talk about Russ was bad last year, the reason it was so like, I don't want to say funny, but the reason it was so like people were making so much fun of it is because he was just making very odd mistakes. Like
it was like he wasn't
the offense as a whole. Like, I mean, I saw Nate Tice tweeting about the other day, and it was clips from the Chiefs game, and it was like 5 in a row where it was like, they're lining up wrong. There's miscommunication. Sutton doesn't know how his alignment's supposed to be. They clearly called a wrong play. They're running leak, and no one's running the leak route. They're running like an end around, and they clearly ran it the wrong way. Like, this was like week 13, like these are things that should have been ironed out by like week 6. These are things that I assume Sean Payton will just have such better control of and such a better ability to keep clean and just let Russell Wilson not have to worry about that again. That alone, I think it'll be near impossible for Russ and the offense as a whole to look worse than it did last year, just because of how goofy it looked last year. It didn't look bad. It looked straight up humiliating and goofy.
Or even more than that, Frankie, like if Russell Wilson is making those same mistakes, Sean Payton is not the type to put up with it. He just isn't. He's from that Bill Parcells family. If you get on Sean Payton's bad side, you're going to be on the bad side. Like it's no, you won't have to guess where you are. You won't have to anything like that. You're going to know whether Sean Payton likes you or whether you're probably gone this next season. And he's just going to move on and not care. It's not Russell Wilson's team this next year. That needs to be said. It's Sean Payton's team. He demands that respect. He has the new big contract. Russell Wilson had it last year. Sean Payton has it this year. Sean Payton's going to live past Russell Wilson, whether he's still here or not, whether he lives past this next season or not. Sean Payton will still be the head coach of the Denver Broncos. So it's just, hey, man, you have to get in line or you're probably out. Colton Cooper chimes in. He says, was looking at Sean Payton's playbook from 2015. I think it was a red zone efficiency is super important in his offense. He has a whole page about his red zone philosophy. Love it. It's very cool. Yeah. I mean, Sean Payton was one of the best offensive coaches in the NFL. He is. Even when he was out of it, everyone thought Sean Payton was awesome. There's a reason why a team like Miami lost a first-round pick to try to get Sean Payton as their head coach, right? They got it deducted. They didn't trade for Sean Payton. They tried to collude to get him. That's how important it was for them to land a coach of this caliber. So I don't know. Any more thoughts on Sean Payton?
Not really anymore on Sean Payton. Not anymore really on Russ. I mean, yeah.
Cool. Let's move on to the next one. Jerry Jeudy, his over-under is set at 875.5. Me personally, I told you before the podcast where I'm leaning on this, Frankie. I am slam dunking.
I'm shocked.
Over. Yeah,
you were shocked. I'm shocked too. Like mind blowing. I think
really low, I feel.
Oh yeah. If this was literally around like 1,200, I think I still would be like questioning taking the over. The fact that it's not even 1,000 yards, guys. Jerry Jeudy's been on pace for 1,000 yards like 2 times. I guess. The injury concern, I really hope Jerry Jeudy's able to make it through a full year. Maybe this is just a homer in me, but like, man, I'm trying to slam that over like nobody's business, dude. 800 yards. That's not a lot in today's league. They play 17 games now. And Jerry Jeudy has been the defined number 1 for this team for the past 2, like through the latter half of last season. And I'd say through all of last season,
Yeah. I mean, we just went through this whole conversation about how we're projecting Russell Wilson to look better because of the surroundings. If Russell Wilson looks better, chances are Jerry Jeudy looks better. He's the best wide receiver on this team. I can confidently say that.
Very much so.
Yeah. Tim Patrick has a case. I do think that, but he's coming off of injury. I'm not putting my eggs in that basket. I'm moving it over to the guy that showed me it latest. And showed me that I think that he can even do more than that. And that's Jerry Jeudy. I mean, to me, this is a slam dunk. I'm putting money on this after. It's interesting that the line is set at this. It makes me wonder if I'm missing something here.
I feel the same way where it's just like, I guess they really are. There are a lot of the injury concerns. I know he does seem to get an ankle injury all the time. And he is a player that plays off of those so much that you can't really it does kind of feel like, once he kind of gets one of those injuries, his season is he's just going to slowly kind of get worse. Like a lot of the injuries he kind of endures, he can't really fully get back to 100% from before he's kind of the season ends.
Right.
But yeah, man, I don't get it. This is a receiver that I think has only taken steps forward. Last year was on pace for, I think it was like 1,300 yards if he was able to stay healthy the whole time. Like,
all right.
I get the injury projections, but as far as, I think he's going to be the leading receiver on this team, and I expect it to be a healthier offense. If it was the same offense as last year, I think he would have been able to hit this. So, yeah.
I agree. On to the next. Cortland Sutton, 5.5 touchdowns. Over under Frankie.
I'll probably go over. I like Cortland. I think that we've talked about this where the jump ball thing, like him being able to win those that's such a like that stat really isn't consistent year over year. You will see guys sometimes have much more dominant years, and then sometimes those numbers kind of regress. Last year, I think we saw kind of a bit more of regression where we saw him kind of not have as many of those big explosive jump over guys make those Randy Moss type catches. I think we see a little bit more of a upward swing of that this year compared to him getting back to his usual form. And I wouldn't be shocked if we see him being one of the primary red zone weapons. So I think I'll go over that. Not too much over. I think he probably gets like 6 or 7, but I think it's going to be a good year for Cortland.
Okay. And I don't disagree, Frankie, but I'm going to go the under just because I think that there's too many choices and not one is dominant in this area. I think that touchdowns are going to be spread very much around this offense through the passing game. I think Dulcich will have his fair share. I think Judy will have his fair share. I think Tim Patrick will have his fair share. Cortland Sutton. We're not even mentioning guys like, hey, what if Callaway scores a couple touchdowns? That's possible. There are players like that across the Broncos, and I think it's going to be spread out. I just don't think any one of these Broncos is dominant enough at wide receiver to get the lion's share of targets in the red zone. So I'm going to go under on that one. And by the way, we have to keep track of all of this to see who ends up being right or wrong. We're probably both going to look like idiots.
So let me ask a little follow-up on that. So I guess this really doesn't, but maybe has to do with it. Do you think that there is a chance that would a trade play any role into this? Do you think there's a chance Cortland Sutton gets traded? Do you think who would be the most likely receiver out of all the receivers to get moved? Say the team starts really slow.
It's Sutton. I think he's the most obvious. It could also be Judy. If Sean Payton decides, hey, I don't really like this Jerry Judy guy, it could easily be gone. I think the only one that I really feel good about is Tim Patrick staying on the team. I think the Broncos are going to give him time to see what he's like coming back from his injury. He's not on some crazy contract. You're not looking to pay him in the future. Cortland Sutton's getting paid higher than Tim Patrick, which makes him easier to trade, or a guy that you would rather trade, I guess. And then Jerry Judy has a contract due at some point soon. So that also puts him above Tim Patrick in that range of, hey, these are guys we could get rid of in the receiver core. But I definitely do think that's a big possibility.
Yeah.
The Broncos if things aren't going right, I could easily see Sean Payton just be like, hey, I kind of want to blow this thing up, guys.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of pieces here that are kind of getting to that age where it's like, man, this isn't really the young team it was 2-3 years ago. They're kind of getting to that point where you're going to have to give a lot of these younger guys contracts but yeah, no, I completely agree. And I mean, a big thing with the Cortland thing too, is, I mean, he had suitors this offseason. We heard the Ravens had a trade lined up. There's a complete possibility that the Ravens are on a Super Bowl track to start out the year, and they have a receiver go down and they end up calling Denver, that's completely possible this year. I completely agree. I think Sutton is probably, if it was going to be anybody, it's probably him. I think that's also just because I'm praying it's not Jerry Judy. Go away, New York Giants. I really hope Danny Dimes has like a horrible start to the year and that team isn't like, man, let's get him another weapon and see what we got here. And they're just like, fuck it, first rounder, Jerry Judy, take it. And then I watch Jerry Judy be like a 1,500-yard receiver every year in New York. He would probably love New York though, man. But hopefully that doesn't happen. But yeah, I think that probably plays a little bit of a part for me as well. Is like, when I think about which of these players, I don't want to say is expendable in the receiver room. That sounds so bad because I don't want to say that about Cortland. That's not at all what I mean. But I mean, like, that I think that the team could have a willingness to replace. And with, like you mentioned, with having a guy like Callaway, who I think easily slides into that Sutton or Tim Patrick role if they were to move on one of those guys, like, I think it's completely possible that a couple weeks in, if this train is not really getting off the beginning of the tracks, that wasn't an analogy that exists, but we're going with it. You can look to move on from him and, kind of look to recoup some assets.
Totally. Next one, Justin Simmons, interceptions. Frankie, it is set at 5.5.
So this one, these ones I kind of set by myself. There aren't many defensive interception in like sack and little numbers, but Justin has been on such a trend of every year he gets like 4, 5, 6. Last year he had 6. He had like 5 and then 5. He gets 5 every single year. So do you think he can repeat with 6? Do you think he can increase the number? What do you think?
I think last year, and he had forced fumbles last year as well.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make that known is that I'm speaking of turnovers in general. I wonder of how much that had to do with just like the passion and joy and love of playing for under Evero, because that was the best season he's had for a little bit, statistically at least. I think he's always been that good of a player. I wonder how he's going to do under Vance Joseph.
That's like a hidden storyline that I've wondered has been like really talked about. Like, and this is nothing to do like against Vance, but like we truly saw Justin become one of the best safeties in the league as soon as Vic came here and they started running a different scheme. Like Justin
Right.
was good under Vance Joseph, but literally like once 2019 came around and we got Vic Fangio, like it was like, oh, like
He's
Justin
amazing.
Simmons is like that guy. Like he's like
Yeah.
one of those. Like don't get me wrong, he wasn't bad before, but he became he became a much better player. And like I think that's definitely a little bit of an interesting storyline to keep an eye out for is like does that kind of switch back? And I mean, again, we just don't really know what he's going to be running, but I'm sorry. Yeah, continue.
No, I totally agree with you. I think you like said it absolutely perfect, Frankie. It's just that you wonder how the fit's going to be under Vance Joseph. Um, so I think this one's very much in the air. I think you hit the line pretty appropriately there, Frankie, at 5.5. I'm going to go under. I still think he's going to have a dominant and great NFL season. I just think that picks come and they go. They really do. So much luck has to go into an interception. They're like, it's just is what it is. They so much luck. You have to be thrown at the pass. You know, how many interceptions do you see that are good passes?
Mm-hmm.
Rare. It really is. 5.5 interceptions. I bet you 4 of those are off of a quarterback making a mistake
Mm-hmm.
rather than the DB making a great play, which leads me to say, hey, I think Justin Simmons is so good that they probably won't be testing him like that. So I'm going to go under.
Okay. Okay. Well, I believe you're wrong, Joey, because I'm going the over. I think Vance is going to play a much more aggressive defense this year. I mean, I think we've seen that the past couple of years. As much as it pains me for when they play against the Chiefs, excuse me, Vance Joseph sends a lot of pressure and he plays a very balls to the wall defense that I think is going to result in more turnovers, but quite possibly much more touchdowns given up and much more
Yards, yeah.
points given up. But I do think that this defense is probably going to get more of those big plays, which is probably going to lead to a lot more excitement. Might sell some more tickets. The front office might kind of like that stuff a lot more, but that does kind of seem like the direction Vance is going to take the team. So I do think that there is the opportunity here that we see Justin repeat his total of 6 or possibly have some more, because I mean, I think the entire defense is going to have the opportunity to eat up a little bit, especially due to our next over-under guy with having a guy like Frank Clark in the mix.
Frank Clark, man. We talked about this a little earlier, and his over-under is set at, you set this one at 8.5 sacks. What do you think there? Would you go over or under at 8.5?
I'll probably go under.
Betting on your own lines, bro.
Right. Yeah,
I
exactly.
respect it.
I'm masterminding this whole thing. You know, I'm
Yeah.
gonna have the.
We're
I
gonna
got
make
the.
sure
I got
you
the,
win this one.
Exactly. I'm the bookie. I'm everything. I'm the judge, jury, executioner. You don't pay me. I'm coming out there. They're like,
Yeah.
exactly. But I'll probably go under. I mean, like again, I'm gonna say this. Frank Clark is an incredibly productive, consistent pass rusher, and he has been over the last 8 years. But I think, as I mentioned before, having the benefits of playing the extra games that the playoffs will get to offer, playing in Kansas City every year, where you get literally 3 or 4 extra games just because you're probably going to be in the conference championship, if not the Super Bowl. The fact that they're probably up 2 scores in like 90% of their games, you know, so he gets to be the added benefit of, oh, teams are going to have to pass the ball and I'm a pass rusher and I get to pin my ears back. So I think it will be a little bit under, because I will say that I think that he's not going to have as much opportunity. I think the rotation behind him is stronger than it was in Kansas City, so I don't think he's going to get as many snaps. Hopefully won't be needed for as many snaps. I mean, I'd like him to be, but again, I'd like to see Nick Benito. I'd like to see Baron Browning. I'd like to see, if they want to use Drew Sanders, I'd like to see them do that. Like, I want to see these guys get opportunity. I do like that they have a guy that I think can play a more consistent role. You can rely on to play 600 to 800 snaps if you need to, but I don't want him taking snaps away from these other guys. And I think that the coaching staff also kind of recognizes that. And I think that kind of reflects in his contract. So I think 8.5 might be a little high, and I'm gonna go slightly under, but I still do think he's gonna be a heavily productive, like, pressure getter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and I agree with you, Frankie. I'm going under that. I think that Frank Clark is, like I said earlier, one of the better signings that you could have made as far as, hey, this is a good football player type signing that you could have made at the edge rush position this stage into the offseason. But I don't see him getting 8.5. I think it's a good chance that he gets somewhere around 6.5 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
6 would be good. And I also want to make sure everyone knows pressure is more valuable than sacks because sacks, like interceptions, so much luck is involved in it. Pressures is a more consistent thing. You can tell who's good or not by looking at pressures. At a better clip than I guess sacks.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go under as well. I agree with you. Colton Cooper hops and he says, I'm going under. Maybe if we made a deep playoff run, he could get it. That I agree with. If the Broncos made a deep playoff run, he could and stayed healthy the entire season. I could definitely see him getting to that 8.5 sack total.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree. I mean, right. And I mean, I think seeing the defensive line go from Draymond Jones to Zach Allen, I think that shift, I'm not saying it's going to be better, it's going to be worse, but I think that shift will see a little bit of a early season probably impact and not being able to get as much pressure. But, who knows? Maybe will be able to start out the season super duper hot. But yeah, I'd probably say he's going to end up a little bit under.
Cool. Next one and last one. Broncos wins 8.5 over under. Do you have the Broncos winning more than 8 games or less than 8 games?
I'm just thinking about this now. I'm going to go over. I'm feeling spicy. I think I've been like optimistic at this point of every Broncos season since I was a young lad. And that's just because, copium, hopium,
I like it.
But like, I really think it's possible this year. Their schedule doesn't look that bad. I do like some of the adjustments they made. When you look back at last year, like, man, you really do recognize how many of those games were winnable. Like, really just a few plays away that I think that the differences Sean Payton will be able to bring. I'm not saying they're going to be a playoff team, but it wouldn't shock me if this team's able to go a clean 9-8. I think a clean 9-8, just missing out on playoffs is entirely possible and would probably be like, outside of like, a deep playoff run where we're all like, holy shit, Russ is back. I think that might be a best case scenario. A clean 9-8 missing playoffs. You get a good draft pick. As much as it might hurt, you get better draft pick than if you would have made playoffs. Because I imagine like if you're going like 9-8 and making playoffs, Russ probably had a mid-season. I don't want them having like, oh, well, he made playoffs, we should keep him around for next year. No, if you go 9-8, but he misses playoffs because Russ wasn't an elite guy, you can cut ties, but you're confident in the foundation that's getting built and going forward. It gives a little bit more charisma and juice to the locker room. We're not viewed as like a loser organization. Going 9-8 is not anything to scoff at. I think that's possibly like a best case scenario for this team because you really like as much as I'd love them to be like in the Caleb Williams hunt if it all goes to poop, I do at least like I am very scared of how bad like the morale gets as you continue to just like cycle bad seasons, coaches, coordinators, new rookies. And it's just like, it's just an endless cycle of like not fun. So I think that would probably be one of the best case scenarios. And I think it's pretty likely this year. So I'm going to go 9 wins would be my guess. And I'm taking the slightest of overs.
Okay. I have to disagree, Frankie.
There we go. Okay,
I like it. I like it. I hope you're correct. I hope that the Broncos go over the 8.5 mark and, you make all the money ever off of it. I just personally, I think the Broncos are in the middle of more of, hey, we're rebuilding right now mode. I think that the Broncos are going into this with building blocks. This is a building block season, and building blocks could be 5 wins. It could be 6 wins. It could be 7 wins. I don't think it necessarily has to be set at something. And specifically, the reason why I'm not as confident as you are, Frankie, the depth, it scares me. Injuries happen in the NFL. Injuries do happen, and they pile up on each other.
Yeah.
Every single team in the NFL deals with it. Towards the end of the season, it's hard for me to imagine looking at the Broncos roster and feeling comfortable like I do just looking at the starting roster now. It's just not something that I feel like I could say, and for those reasons, I'm pushing under on that one.
Yeah. No, I think that's completely fair. I'm looking at the schedule now, and I mean, the team's got to start out hot. I will say that's kind of one of the scariest things about this year is like they are not going to have a lot of time, I think, for the show. Not to say not a lot of time, but like like the winnable games for them are right away. They play the Raiders week 1, they play the Commanders, Dolphins, Bears, Jets. Those are their first 5 games. I'd say all 5 of those games, maybe 4, depending upon how good the Dolphins look. Dolphins could look like an absolute powerhouse if, Tua is able to keep it on fire and their offense just looks unstoppable, whatever. 4 out of 5 out of those 5 games, I think are winnable to possibly very winnable. Then they play the Chiefs and it's going to be a nightmare. But before that game, it's going to be happy roses. We're going to be happy. We're probably going to be like, oh my God, here we go. Oh my God, it's a Thursday night game. I'm realizing the last time there was a Thursday night game and I had to watch a Chiefs Broncos games with my friend, it was a bad time. That's just a random, I just had like Vietnam flashbacks of that. It was literally, this is a good story. I got to pause for a second. We're at a bar, walk in, and it was one of those, they have like the huge projector up on the wall and we were upstairs. Right. So I think it was, it might've been the Case Keenum game. I don't know. It was a game like a few years ago where they were down like 28-3. I think the final score was like 49-7 or something. Like, and I was literally like 3 feet from this like 100-inch by 100-inch projector, just like screaming the Chiefs score at me. It was a bad time. So yeah, that's my random story there. But yeah, weeks 1 through 5, they got to scrape out as many wins as possible because like once this gets a little bit deeper in the schedule, like they're going to be facing some playoff teams. Like they're going to have to face the Chiefs twice. They're going to have to face the Bills, the Vikings, who I think might still be a decent team, the Lions, Browns, Chargers twice. It gets a little harder, I think, as the schedule goes on. So a big part of my belief is they got to start out hot. They cannot start slow this year at any means necessary.
Starting off hot scares you too a little bit. Like if you're betting on the Broncos starting off hot with a new head coach and Sean Payton, and it's not just like the average team that hires a new head coach. Sean Payton is going to bring a completely new style to the Broncos. I think he's trying to flip this thing up over on its head. I don't think it's just like slight adjustment. I think he's trying to be like, hey, I know how all you guys are used to this coaching thing going. I am flipping that around. We're completely different. So that scares me a little bit. But hey, I'm not like super down on the Broncos. If they go over, I'm not shocked.
Oh yeah.
So I think it's a good line. Yeah. But anyways, Frankie, I think this was the first really good pod back, man.
Oh yeah.
It was fun talking ball with you as always. It's a great time recording this thing, but where can everybody find your work, man?
I'm over on Twitter. I've been pretty slow right now, but I'll get some videos out. I've been slowly putting together the Frank Clark highlights. It's fun. There's a signing they got that actually has like good stuff for once. I'm actually like, I'm excited to watch it. He's getting a lot of pressures. I'm watching him tear up the Bengals. It's a good time, but I'll get some of that stuff out soon. So follow me over there, the TikTok as well as where I post the film. And yeah, make sure you're listening over here every week and listening to me and Joey riff it up about Denver, whatever's going on in his Nuggets world and whatever's going on in our Broncos world. And yeah, just make sure you're constantly tuning in. Where can they find your glorious stuff, Joseph?
Yeah, follow me at JR Drafts. Make sure you're following the YouTube. If you're not listening to are on YouTube right now, make sure you're subscribing to Let's Talk Broncos YouTube. We have a lot of cool stuff coming. Now that we're getting back in the kick of it, we have a lot of ideas going, some cool stuff coming up. So make sure you're subscribing to that. We'll also let you know on Twitter where you can find us at the LTB podcast. But guys, that's all I really have today. And I haven't done this for a while, so it's going to feel good. Go Broncos.
Go Broncos, right.